Montana Territory, 1879, where men measured worth in acres, cattle, and handshakes that broke fingers. A place where the land could kill you as easily as save you, and family names carried more weight than gold. Here, among the sprawling ranches and untamed wilderness, the Blackfoot River carved through the Wapiti Valley, and no name commanded more respect or fear than Hawkins. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Hawkins Ranch stretched across 30,000 acres of the richest grazing land this side of the divide. 40 ranch hands, 20,000 head of cattle, and one unmovable force of nature at its center, Emmett Hawkins. But this story isn't about the father, it's about the son who lived in his shadow and the woman no one believed could step into the light. Late autumn sunlight filtered through dust motes in Emmett Hawkins's study, catching on the polished brass of the grandfather clock that had traveled west in a covered wagon 30 years prior. The study smelled of leather-bound ledgers and the particular blend of tobacco Emmett imported from Virginia, a reminder of the world he'd left behind to build his empire. Jesse Hawkins stood before his father's massive oak desk, hat in hand, shoulders squared under his wool coat. At 28, Jesse had his father's height and his mother's thoughtful eyes, though few had seen them gentle in recent years. He'd earned his place as the ranch's foreman through work, not birthright, his hands calloused from the same labor. As any hand, his mind sharp from nights spent studying the business while others drank away their wages. Emmett didn't look up from the papers spread before him, his silver-streaked hair falling across his forehead as he made notations with practiced strokes of his fountain pen. "You wanted to see me," Jesse said, a statement, not a question. Emmett finally raised his eyes, the weight of his gaze landing on his son like a physical force. "The Nakota Creek property. You've looked it over?" Jesse nodded once. 3 times. "Now, good water rights, decent grazing, but the soil's poor in the north section. Wouldn't support more than 5,000 heads without significant investment. And the structures. Main house is solid. Outbuildings need work. Nothing that can't be fixed with lumber and labor." Emmett leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath his considerable frame. "And yet Owen Lakota can't make it turn. A prophet." Jesse's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Drought hit him hard 3 seasons running, lost nearly half his herd. Then his wife took ill." "I don't need excuses," Emmett cut in, voice flat as hammered steel. "I need solutions." The clock ticked 7 times before Jesse spoke again. "Why are we discussing Lakota's troubles?" A thin smile crossed Emmett's face, the kind that never reached his eyes. He slid a folded document across the polished desktop. "Because as of yesterday, his troubles are our opportunity." Jesse didn't reach for the paper. "Meaning?" "Meaning I've arranged to acquire Nakota Creek Ranch. Lakota would never sell to you." The words came sharper than Jesse intended. Emmett's smile didn't falter. "He's not selling. He's merging." "Merging," Jesse repeated, the word tasting strange. "Since when do we take on partners?" Emmett's laugh was short and dry. "We don't, but we do make marriages." The air in the room seemed to thin. Jesse felt a chill spread from his spine outward, the kind of cold that came before a lightning strike. "What did you do?" The question barely made it past Jesse's clenched teeth. "Secured 10,000 acres of prime ranch land, water rights to Nakota Creek, and expanded our eastern boundary to the mountainside." Emmett tapped the document with one thick finger. "All perfectly legal and witnessed." Jesse finally picked up the paper, unfolding it with controlled movements that betrayed none of the storm building inside him. The contract was simple, direct, and binding. In exchange for forgiveness of substantial debts and a 15% interest in the combined operations, Owen Lakota would transfer ownership of Nakota Creek Ranch to Hawkins Holdings upon the marriage of his daughter to Jesse Hawkins. The paper trembled almost imperceptibly in Jesse's hand. "You're selling me." "Don't be dramatic. I'm expanding our holdings through the most efficient means available. The Lakota girl brings with her the land, the water rights, and the goodwill of the Eastern Valley families." Emmett's voice hardened. "You're 30 years old, 28, and spend your nights either working or drinking alone. It's time you settled. This arrangement solves multiple problems at once." Jesse carefully refolded the contract along its creases. "And if I refuse?" Emmett's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop further. "Then I'll find someone who understands the value of family loyalty. Perhaps your cousin David would appreciate the opportunity to secure his future." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Jesse's position, his years of work, his future at the ranch, all could be passed to his cousin with a single word from Emmett. "Does she know?" Jesse asked finally. "Her father presented the arrangement last week." "And? And what?" "She's a woman, with few prospects and a bankrupted family. She accepted." Jesse turned toward the window, looking out over the ranch that had been his entire world. In the distance, a line of riders moved cattle toward the winter pastures, dust rising behind them like smoke. "What's her name?" he asked, his back still to his father. "Kiona. Kiona Lakota." Jesse's memory stirred. Owen Lakota's daughter. He had vague recollections of a quiet girl with serious eyes at town gatherings years ago. Then she'd disappeared from public view after the fire, Jesse said quietly. "She was injured in that house fire 6 or 7 years back." Emmett shrugged, already returning his attention to his ledgers. "So I'm told. Keeps to herself now. Manages the Lakota books, apparently quite capably." "You've never even seen her," Jesse realized. "I'm not marrying her." Jesse turned back, studying his father with new eyes. "They say her face." "They say many things," Emmett interrupted, impatience finally showing. "What matters is the land. And the alliance. She comes from good stock. Her mother was half Blackfoot, educated back east. The girl reads, writes, and ciphers. She'll give you strong sons and won't embarrass you in company. That's more than most men get." Jesse's hand tightened around his hat brim. "When?" 2 weeks from Saturday. Town church. Small ceremony. Nothing. Elaborate given their circumstances. Emmett dipped his pen in ink. "I expect you to conduct yourself with the Hawkins dignity. This isn't a punishment, son. It's your inheritance expanding before your eyes." Jesse said nothing, recognizing the dismissal in his father's tone. He placed his hat on his head and walked to the door, each step measured and controlled. "Jesse." His father's voice stopped him at the threshold. "The Lakota girl may not be what you choose for yourself. But remember, in this life, we don't always get what we want. We get what we need to survive. That's the law of this land." Jesse didn't turn. "Is that what Mother was to you? What do you need to survive?" For a moment something flickered across Emmett's face, a shadow of something human and wounded. Then it was gone, replaced by the impassive mask he'd perfected over decades. "Your mother understood her place in this world, as will you." Jesse closed the door behind him without another word and strode through the main house, past ranch hands who knew better than to speak when the young Hawkins moved with that particular set to his shoulders. He reached the stables and saddled his dun mare with quick, efficient movements, his mind 1,000 miles from his hands' work. Within minutes, he was riding hard toward the eastern ridgeline, the only place on Hawkins' land where he couldn't see. The ranch buildings spread below like a kingdom, the only place where, for brief moments, he could pretend he was simply a man on a horse, not the heir to an empire built on his father's ruthless determination. The mare picked her way up the steep trail, sure-footed and patient. At the summit, Jesse dismounted and stood at the edge of the bluff, looking east toward Nakota Creek Ranch. From this distance, it looked peaceful. A cluster of buildings nestled in the valley, smoke rising from the main house chimney. Cattle, dots scattered across the yellowing autumn grass. Somewhere in those buildings was a woman he'd never properly met, now bound to him by her father's desperation and his father's ambition, Keona Lakota. A woman hidden from the world after tragedy marked her. A woman who managed ledgers and lived in shadows. "Damn you, father," Jesse muttered, though the wind carried the words away unheard. The mare nickered softly behind him. Jesse turned and stroked her sleek neck, drawing comfort from the simple, honest connection. Animals never lied, never manipulated, never saw you as anything but what you were. "What am I going to do, River?" he asked the horse quietly. River offered no answer, beyond gentle brown eyes and soft breath against his palm. 2 days later, Jesse rode to town alone, taking the long route that passed by Nakota Creek land. He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more, but as he approached the boundary line marked by a sagging fence and weathered signposts, he knew he was looking for something he couldn't name. The Lakota Ranch had once been prosperous, not on the scale of Hawkins' holdings, but respectable. Now he could see the signs of hardship everywhere: unpainted outbuildings, thin cattle, fields left fallow that should have been planted with winter hay. Pride had kept Owen Lakota from seeking help until it was too late. Pride and something else. A stubborn independence that Jesse, despite himself, respected. A movement caught his eye near the smaller cabin set apart from the main house. A figure in a dark dress, head covered with a shawl, bent over what appeared to be a garden plot. Without conscious thought, Jesse turned River off the main trail and toward the cabin. He was 50 yards away when the figure straightened, sensing his approach. She didn't run, didn't call out, just stood motionless, watching his advance with the stillness of someone accustomed to observing rather than being observed. Jesse stopped River at a respectful distance and removed his hat. "Miss Lakota?" The woman didn't answer immediately. The shawl shadowed her face, revealing only the curve of her chin and the line of her throat. "Mr. Hawkins," she finally replied, her voice lower and steadier than he expected. "You're a long way from your father's land." So she knew who he was. Jesse inclined his head slightly. Not for much longer, it seems. A sound escaped her, not quite a laugh, though something adjacent to it. "No, not for much longer." An awkward silence stretched between them. Jesse found himself uncharacteristically at a loss for words. This was not how he'd imagined their first meeting, though in truth he hadn't imagined it at all until his father had placed that contract before him. "Was there something you needed?" she asked finally. Jesse realized he was staring and quickly gathered himself. "I thought, perhaps we should speak before the ceremony." "Is there something to discuss?" Her voice remained neutral, giving nothing away. The arrangements seemed quite thorough. "The arrangements, yes," Jesse agreed, shifting slightly in his saddle. "But not the people affected by them." Now she did laugh, a brief, harsh sound that contained no humor. "How unexpected. Hawkins is concerned with people rather than property." Her words stung more than they should have. "You don't know me." "And you don't know me," she countered. "Yet here we are, bound by documents neither of us signed." Jesse couldn't argue with her assessment. He dismounted, tying River's reins loosely to a fence post. "Then perhaps we should remedy that." Keona Lakota took a step back as he approached, her hand rising to adjust her shawl, keeping her face in shadow. "There's no need," she said, and for the first time he heard something like vulnerability in her voice. "You'll soon see everything. You need to know." "I prefer to make my own judgments," Jesse replied quietly. For a long moment she stood motionless. Then, with a deliberate slowness that suggested both resignation and defiance, she lowered the shawl. Jesse had prepared himself for scars, had steeled himself not to react, not to show any shock at whatever damage the fire had left behind. But nothing had prepared him for the reality of Keona Lakota, The right side of her face was indeed marked with scars, a tracery of healed burns that pulled slightly at the corner of her mouth and spread upward across her cheekbone to disappear into her hairline. But it was not the scars that caught and held Jessie's attention. It was her eyes, dark as obsidian, intelligent and utterly unafraid. They met his gaze with a directness few men, let alone women, ever showed him. They were eyes that had seen pain and survived it, eyes that measured and weighed and found most wanting, and it was the unmarked side of her face, the perfect sweep of cheekbone, the curve of her jaw, the fullness of her mouth, that completed a beauty more striking for its imperfection than any flawless face could claim. Jessie realized he was staring again and forced himself to speak. "The rumors greatly exaggerated your condition." A flash of something, anger perhaps, or disappointment, crossed her face. "Did they? How fortunate for you." "That's not what I meant, isn't it?" She pulled the shawl back over her head once, again casting her face in shadow. "You may tell your father his investment is not entirely damaged goods. I'm sure that will ease his mind, if not yours." Jessie felt a flush of shame heat his face. "Miss Lakota—" "Kiona," she corrected him. "If we're to be married, you should use my name, and I know why you came. Curiosity, concern for your future, perhaps even pity. You've satisfied the first, need not worry about the second. And I will never accept the third. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to attend to." She turned and walked toward the cabin, her back straight, her steps measured. No hesitation, no looking back. Jessie watched her go, aware that this brief encounter had shattered every assumption he'd made. He'd expected a meek, damaged woman grateful for the security of the Hawkins name. Instead, he'd found someone who viewed their arrangement with the same clear-eyed pragmatism as he did, as a business transaction neither had chosen. What he hadn't expected was to find himself intrigued. As he mounted river and turned back toward the main road, a strange thought occurred to him. For the first time in years, he was genuinely curious about what tomorrow might bring. Jessie returned to Hawkins Ranch with his thoughts in disarray. The evening sun cast long shadows across the valley as he guided river through the main gates. Ranch hands tipped their hats as he passed, but he barely noticed, his mind still replaying the encounter at Nakota Creek. He handed River off to Young, Tommy, the stable boy, with a distracted pat to the horse's flank. "Cool her down properly. She had a good run today." "Yes, sir, Mr. Hawkins," Tommy replied, eyes curious but knowing better than to ask where the boss's son had been riding all afternoon. The main house loomed ahead, windows glowing amber in the twilight. Jessie paused at the bottom of the porch. Steps, suddenly reluctant to enter the domain his father ruled with such unyielding certainty. Inside those walls, decisions were made, futures determined, all with the cold calculation of profit and loss. Outside, at least he could breathe. "You'll catch your death standing there like a fence post." The voice startled him. May Clearwater stepped out of the shadows at the far end of the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. The Blackfoot woman had been the Hawkins housekeeper since before Jessie was born, and the closest thing to a mother he'd had since his own death when he was 12. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Just getting some air," Jessie replied, climbing the steps. May's dark eyes missed nothing. "You rode to Nakota Creek." It wasn't a question. Jessie sometimes wondered if May had some mysterious ability to read minds, though the more likely explanation was that Tommy had mentioned his horse's condition when he returned. "News travels fast," he said dryly, "faster than wisdom usually." May folded her arms across her chest. "You met her?" Jessie nodded once. "And?" He hesitated, unsure how to describe Kiona Lakota. "She's not what I expected." A small smile lifted the corners of May's mouth. The best ones never are. She turned toward the door. Your father's been asking after you. Dinner's in 20 minutes. Jesse sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his dust-streaked hair. I'll wash up. May paused, her hand on the door handle. Jesse, her use of his first name, rare and always meaningful, made him look up. Remember something. A marriage isn't made by the ceremony, it's built in the days that follow. Before he could respond, she disappeared inside, leaving him alone with her cryptic wisdom and the weight of his own conflicted thoughts. Dinner with Emmett was a strained affair of terse conversation about cattle prices and preparations for winter. Jesse answered his father's questions with minimal words, volunteering nothing about his ride to Nakoda Creek. If Emmett suspected where his son had been, he gave no indication. It wasn't until they retired to the study of brandy that Emmett broached the subject directly. Pastor Wallace confirmed the ceremony for 2 Saturdays from now. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. 10 o'clock. I've invited the county commissioner and Judge Blackwood. Good connections to maintain. Jesse stared into his own untouched glass. And the Lakotas? Who will stand with them? Emmett's expression suggested the question had never occurred to him. I imagine Owen will find someone suitable. Her mother's people, the Blackfoot family? A flicker of annoyance crossed Emmett's face. That connection is complicated. Owen didn't elaborate, and I didn't inquire. It's not relevant to our interests. Our interests. Always our interests. Never the human concerns that might lie beneath the surface of business arrangements. I met her today, Jesse said quietly. Emmett's eyebrows rose slightly. Did you now? He took a measured sip of brandy. And is she functional? The word struck Jesse like a physical blow. Functional, he repeated, unable to keep the edge from his voice. She's a woman, not a piece of machinery. You know what I mean, Emmett replied impatiently. The talk about her injuries is greatly exaggerated. Jesse cut in. She bears scars, yes, but she's perfectly capable, intelligent, speaks her mind. The last part might prove problematic, Emmett muttered. But as long as she can manage a household and bear children, the rest is immaterial. Jesse set his glass down with careful control. Is that how you viewed my mother? As breeding stock? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Emmett's face hardened into the mask Jesse knew too well, the expression that preceded either icy silence or explosive rage. Your mother, Emmett said with dangerous quietness, understood her role in building this legacy. She never questioned what needed to be done. And that's why she withered away. The words escaped before Jesse could stop them. Because she understood her role too well? Emmett's hand tightened around his glass. For a moment, Jesse thought his father might throw it. Instead, he set it down with deliberate care and rose to his feet. You will not speak of her that way, Emmett said, each word precise as a knife cut. You, who barely remember her, have no right to judge what we built together. I remember enough, Jesse replied softly. I remember how she looked out windows. How she stopped singing, how the light went out of her eyes years before the consumption took her body. Emmett turned away, his broad shoulders rigid beneath his waistcoat. You were a child. You saw what children see, fragments without context. I saw enough. The grandfather clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed, each second stretching. Taut as a wire, the arrangements are made, Emmett finally said, his back still turned. The Lakota girl will become a Hawkins. The properties will merge, and you will do your duty by this family. Your personal feelings on the matter are noted and irrelevant. Jesse stood, recognizing the dismissal. At the door, he paused. Her name is Kiona. Emmett didn't respond, and Jesse let himself out, closing the heavy oak door quietly behind him. In his room, Jesse sat at the edge of his bed, boots off, shirt half unbuttoned, and stared at nothing. The windows were open to the cool night air, carrying the distant sounds of the ranch settling into darkness. A dog barking at the bunkhouse, the creak of the windmill, a cowboy's harmonica playing a melancholy tune. His eyes fell on the small pine desk in the corner where a sheet of cream stationery lay beside an inkwell. Before he could question himself, Jesse crossed to the desk, sat down, and picked up his pen. "Miss Lakota," he began, then crossed it out. "Kiona," he wrote instead. "Our meeting today was not what I intended. I spoke poorly and listened worse. 4. In that I apologize. You are right that we find ourselves bound by documents neither of us signed, but perhaps we might find a way forward that honors both our situations without surrendering our dignity in the process. I would like to call on you, properly if you would permit it, not to satisfy curiosity or ease concerns, but to begin whatever this is to become with honesty rather than assumption. Respectfully, Jesse Hawkins." He read the short note twice, unsure if he'd said too much or too little. Then, before he could reconsider, he folded the paper, sealed it with wax, and set it aside to be delivered in the morning. For the first time since his father had placed that contract before him, Jesse slept without dreams of escape. Dawn came early in the valley, painting the eastern sky in bands of gold and rose. Jesse was already up, dressed in a clean shirt and his better riding coat, not formal enough to suggest pretension, but a step above his everyday work clothes. He tucked the sealed note into his breast pocket and headed to the stables. "Taking River out again?" Tommy asked, looking surprised to see Jesse so early. "No, saddle Tempest today," Jesse replied, referring to his black gelding, a horse he typically reserved for town visits and the rare social occasion. Tommy's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded and set about preparing the horse. Jesse busied himself checking the saddle, adjusting the stirrups, small tasks to occupy his hands, while his mind raced ahead to Nakoda Creek. He was halfway there when he spotted a rider coming toward him, a lean figure on a compact sorrel mare, moving at an unhurried pace. As they drew closer, Jesse recognized Owen Lakota by his distinctive white Stetson and the silver conchos on his saddle. They met where the road forked, one branch leading to town, the other to Hawkins' ranch. Jesse reined Tempest to a stop and touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Mr. Lakota." "Young Hawkins." Owen's weathered face gave little away, but his eyes, the same obsidian as his daughter's, were sharp and assessing. "Early for a social call." Jesse straightened slightly in the saddle. "I was hoping to speak with Kiona." Something flickered across Owen's face, surprise perhaps, or wariness. "Were you now?" "With your permission, of course," Jesse added, though they both knew the formality was hollow. In 2 weeks' time, he would have the legal right to speak with Kiona whenever he pleased, regardless of her father's wishes. Owen studied him for a long moment. "She's not at the ranch. Rode into town at first light. Something about books for the school teacher." Disappointment settled in Jesse's chest, though he kept his expression neutral. "I see. Perhaps another time, then." He made to turn Tempest back toward Hawkins' land, but Owen's voice stopped him. "She'll be at Whitaker's store until midday." The older man's tone was carefully even. "Tends to lose track of time around books." Jesse looked back, surprised at the implicit permission in Owen's words. "Thank you." Owen merely nodded, then clicked his tongue to urge his mare forward. As they passed, he said quietly, "She reads like most men breathe. Necessary and constant." Before Jesse could respond, Owen rode on, his straight back and proud posture belying the financial ruin that had driven him to the arrangement with Emmett Hawkins. Jesse watched him go, struck by the dignity the man maintained even in defeat. Then he turned Tempest toward town. the note in his pocket, feeling suddenly inadequate for the conversation that lay ahead. Mill Creek was hardly more than a wide spot in the road, a collection of wooden buildings strung along a single dusty main street, with the church steeple providing the only vertical ambition. But it served as the commercial and social center for the scattered ranches that surrounded it, and on a Saturday morning, the hitching posts were crowded with horses and wagons. Jesse dismounted in front of Whitaker's general store, securing Tempest's reins with a quick knot. He paused on the boardwalk, suddenly uncertain. What exactly was he hoping to accomplish? The marriage was set, the contract signed. Was this attempt at, what? Courtship? Understanding? Was it merely a salve? For his conscience? He removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he'd never quite outgrown. Then, squaring his shoulders, he pushed open the door, setting the small bell above it to jingling. The interior of Whitaker's was a carefully organized chaos of merchandise. Shelves stacked with canned goods and dry staples, barrels of flour and sugar, tools hanging from the rafters, and glass cases displaying everything from patent medicines to hair combs. The air smelled of coffee, leather, and the faint sweetness of peppermint sticks. Jesse scanned the store, nodding politely to Mrs. Whitaker behind the counter, and a couple of ranch wives examining bolts of fabric. Then he spotted her in the back corner, half hidden in the narrow alcove where Mr. Whitaker kept his small selection of books. Kiona stood with her back to the room, her dark hair braided and hanging down her back. She wore a simple dress of deep blue, modest and practical, with none of the bustles or frills that town women favored. Without the shawl obscuring her profile, Jessie could see the graceful line of her neck, the straight set of her shoulders. She was so absorbed in the book open in her hands that she didn't notice his approach until he was just a few feet away. When she finally sensed his presence and turned, Jessie had the strange satisfaction of seeing genuine surprise flash across her face before her composed mask returned. "Mr. Hawkins," she said, closing the book but keeping her place with one finger. "This is unexpected." Jessie realized he was still clutching his hat in his hands like some nervous schoolboy. He resisted the urge to fidget with the brim. "Miss Lakota." He inclined his head slightly. "Your father mentioned I might find you here." Kiona's eyebrow rose slightly. "Did he? How helpful of him." "I'd planned to call at your ranch this morning," Jessie explained, feeling oddly defensive. "I wanted to—" He stopped, suddenly aware of Mrs. Parker and Mrs. Donnelly watching them with poorly disguised interest from the fabric counter. Kiona followed his gaze and gave a small, understanding nod. "Perhaps we might continue this conversation outside." Relief flooded through him. "Yes, please." They made their purchases separately. Kiona, the book she'd been reading. Jessie, a sack of peppermint sticks he had no particular desire for, but grabbed as a pretense, and met again on the boardwalk. Outside the store, Mill Creek's main street was busy with Saturday traffic, offering little privacy for conversation. Without discussion, they fell into step together, walking toward the small town square where a lone cottonwood tree provided shade over a simple wooden bench. "You had something to discuss," Kiona prompted as they reached the relative privacy of the tree. Jessie reached into his pocket and withdrew the sealed note, now feeling foolish. "I wrote this, but perhaps it's better to simply say it." He tucked the note away again. "I want to apologize for yesterday. My approach was clumsy." Kiona studied him, her expression guarded. "You surprised me, that's all. I didn't expect attention." Before the ceremony, the implication that she expected to be ignored until legally bound to him struck Jessie like a physical blow. "Is that what you thought? That I would simply appear at the church, speak the words, and lead you away like a purchased mare?" A flash of something, anger perhaps, sparked in her dark eyes. Isn't that precisely what this arrangement is? A transaction? Your father acquires land and water rights. My father keeps his home and dignity. You get a wife, I get security. Put so badly, Jessie couldn't deny the accuracy of her assessment, and yet, it doesn't have to be only that, he said quietly. Kiona looked away, her profile to him now, the scarred side hidden. Doesn't it? Your father made this arrangement without meeting me, without caring who I am beyond my name and what comes with it. You rode to Nakoda Creek yesterday to satisfy your curiosity about the damaged goods you're receiving. That's not fair, Jessie protested, though part of him acknowledged the grain of truth in her words. Isn't it? She turned back to him, eyes challenging. Would you be standing here now if my face were unmarked, if I were just Owen Lakota's plain daughter with good breeding stock and useful property? The question knocked the breath from him. Would he? If Kiona had been an ordinary young woman from a failing ranch, would he have fought his father's arrangement or simply accepted it as the price of inheritance? Would he have sought her out before the ceremony, tried to establish some human connection beneath the business transaction? He didn't know, and his hesitation must have shown on his face. Kiona nodded slightly, as if confirming something to herself. You see, even you can't answer that. Her voice held no bitterness, just a clear-eyed pragmatism that was somehow worse. So let's not pretend this is anything but what it is. Jessie felt something slipping away, not a romance, nothing so formed as that, but a possibility he hadn't realized he wanted until this moment. I'm not pretending, he said more forcefully than he intended. Yes, this began as my father's arrangement. Yes, I rode to Nakoda Creek out of curiosity about who I was being bound to. But standing here now, talking to you, this is my choice. Mine alone. She regarded him steadily, neither accepting or rejecting his words. And what exactly are you choosing, Mr. Hawkins? To know you, he said simply, before vows make it an obligation rather than a desire. A faint pink tinged her unmarked cheek, though her expression remained composed. Pretty words. Honest ones. He countered. I don't have my father's gift for manipulation. What you see is what you get with me. And what exactly am I seeing? She asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. Jessie considered the question seriously. A man caught between duty and dignity, a rancher who respects the land but questions the cost of keeping it. Someone who spent his life meeting expectations without examining them. He met her gaze directly. Someone who would like the chance to be more than his father's son and your reluctant husband. For the first time, he saw something soften in Kiona's expression. Not surrender, but perhaps a willingness to consider possibilities beyond the rigid framework they'd both assumed. That's a more thoughtful answer than I expected, she admitted. Jessie smiled slightly. I'm occasionally capable of thought. Just don't tell my father. He prefers unquestioning obedience. A small answering smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, transforming her face in a way that made Jessie's breath catch. Your secret is safe with me. They sat in surprisingly comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the town continuing around them, wagon wheels on dirt, snatches of conversation, a dog barking somewhere down the street. The book, Jessie finally said, nodding toward the brown paper package in her lap. What is it? Iona hesitated, then unwrapped it enough to show him the cover. Principles of Practical Agriculture and Animal Husbandry. Jessie's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. That's not what I expected. A romance novel, perhaps? Her tone was dry. Something appropriately feminine? He had the grace to look embarrassed. I didn't mean... I know what you meant, she interrupted, but without heat. Everyone has expectations of what a woman should read, should know, should be. This, she tapped the book, is practical. We've lost too many cattle to preventable illness, Knowledge is never wasted, Mr. Hawkins. Jesse, he said, if I'm to call you Kiona, then please, it's Jesse. She studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. Jesse, then. Something shifted between them with the exchange of names. Not intimacy exactly, but a step away from the formal distance of strangers. I should return to the ranch, Kiona said, rewrapping her book. My father will be wondering. Jessie stood. When she did, oddly reluctant for the conversation to end. May I call on you tomorrow, properly this time, through the front door? Kiona considered him, her head tilted slightly. For what purpose? To continue this, he said simply, to talk, to know each other before we're bound by law and not just circumstance. She was quiet for so long that Jessie thought she would refuse. Then, with a small nod that contained neither enthusiasm nor dread, just calm acceptance, she said, 3 o'clock. Father naps then. We can speak freely. 3 o'clock, Jessie confirmed, unable to keep a small smile from his face. Thank you. Kiona adjusted her shawl, arranging it to partially shadow the scarred side of her face, a habitual gesture Jessie now realized, not a response to his presence. Don't thank me yet, Jessie Hawkins. You may find you prefer mystery to reality. Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, her straight back and measured stride drawing more than a few curious glances from Mill Creek's Saturday shoppers. Jessie watched her go, aware that for the first time since his father had presented that contract, he was looking forward to tomorrow rather than dreading it. What had begun as his father's calculated arrangement was becoming something he couldn't yet name, but something that, against all odds, felt like the first honest thing in his life in years. Sunday passed with excruciating slowness for Jessie. He attended church service in town with his father, nodding mechanically at the neighbors and business associates who approached to congratulate Emmett on the upcoming merger with the Lakota property. The Lakotas themselves were notably absent from the pews, a fact that prompted whispered speculation among the congregation. Haven't seen that girl in church for years, Mrs. Blackwood murmured to her husband, just loudly enough for Jessie to overhear. Not since the accident. Some say it turned her bitter toward God. Jessie bit his tongue, resisting the urge to defend. A woman he barely knew. What right did these people have to judge Kiona's faith or lack thereof? What did any of them know about living with visible scars in a world that valued women primarily for their unblemished appearance? By 3 o'clock. The following day, Jessie had changed his shirt twice and paced the length of his bedroom enough times to wear a path in the floorboards. He'd told no one at the ranch where he was going, not even May, who had given him a knowing look when he'd asked for a fresh-pressed shirt. He rode Tempest at an easy canter toward Nakota Creek, the afternoon sun warm on his back. The land between the two ranches was beautiful in its stark way, rolling grasslands dotted with sage, framed by the distant blue mountains. Land that would soon be united under the Hawkins name, if not the Hawkins spirit. The Lakota Ranch appeared more welcoming in the full light of day than it had on his previous visits. Someone had swept the front porch of the main house and placed a pot of late-blooming wildflowers beside the door. The windows gleamed, freshly washed, and the yard had been recently raked clear of debris. Jessie tethered Tempest to the hitching post, removed his hat, and smoothed his hair before approaching the door. Before he could knock, it swung open to reveal Kiona, dressed in a simple skirt and blouse of deep forest green that complemented her copper skin and dark eyes. "You're punctual," she said, her tone either approving or disapproving, merely observant. "My mother's influence," Jessie replied with a small smile. She believed tardiness was a form of dishonesty, a lie about the value of other people's time. Something flickered in Kiona's eyes. Interest, perhaps. A wise perspective. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Please come in. The interior of the Lakota home was modest but meticulously kept. The furnishings were old but of good quality, showing the care of generations. Bookshelves lined one wall of the sitting room, filled not with decorative volumes but well-worn, clearly read books. A patchwork quilt in geometric patterns draped the back of a rocking chair, its colors still vibrant despite obvious age. "My father is resting," Kiona said, gesturing toward a doorway at the back of the house. "His health has been uncertain since last winter." Jessie nodded, hearing the concern beneath her measured words. "I'm sorry to hear that. Would you care for tea?" she asked, moving toward the kitchen with practiced ease. "Or perhaps coffee?" "Tea would be fine, thank you." Jessie remained standing, unsure where to place himself in this unfamiliar domestic setting. Kiona busied herself with the kettle, keeping her scarred side angled away from him as she worked, not dramatically, but with the subtle adjustments of long habit. Jessie found himself watching her movements, the efficient grace with which she navigated her domain. "Please sit," she said, gesturing to the wooden table by the window. "This won't take long." Jessie took a seat, placing his hat on the table beside him. Through the window he could see the eastern pastures of Nakota Creek. Good grazing land, though the herd visible in the distance was noticeably smaller than it should have been for a ranch this size. "Your cattle look healthy," he commented. "Quality stock." Kiona glanced over her shoulder. "We've focused on breeding rather than numbers since the drought. Better to have 50 strong animals than 100 weak ones." "Smart strategy," Jessie said, genuinely impressed. "Not many ranchers think that way. Most just want more heads to count. Most ranchers have the luxury of making mistakes." Kiona placed 2 steaming cups on the table and seated herself across from him. "We don't." The simple statement contained volumes about the precarious position of the Lakota ranch, about the decisions that had led Owen to accept Emmett's arrangement, about the pressure Kiona had lived under as her family's fortunes declined. "Is that why you study animal husbandry?" Jessie asked, nodding toward a small stack of books on the edge of the table. "To avoid costly mistakes." Kiona's fingers curled around her cup. "Partly. Knowledge is its own kind of security. When we couldn't afford to hire experienced hands, I became them." She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity or pride, but Jessie felt a surge of respect nonetheless. While he had been learning the business side of ranching from his father's carefully constructed position of privilege, she had been fighting to preserve her family's land with nothing but determination and self-education. That can't have been easy, he said quietly. Kiona took a sip of her tea before responding. "Few worthwhile things are easy, Mr. Hawkins. Jessie," she corrected herself, "but they are often necessary." Like our marriage, the unspoken words hung between them. "Tell me about the fire," Jessie said suddenly, then immediately regretted the bluntness of the question. "I'm sorry, that was—" "It's all right," Kiona interrupted, her expression carefully neutral. "You're not the first to ask, though most people prefer to whisper about it behind my back." She set her cup down with deliberate care. "It was winter. I was 17. A lantern fell in the storage shed where we kept hay for the winter. I was inside checking supplies." Jessie listened, watching how her eyes focused on some middle distance as she recounted the facts with detached precision. "The flames caught so quickly. I tried to smother them with a blanket, but the hay—" She shook, her head slightly. "My father pulled me out. He burned his hands badly. We lost most of our winter feed, and I lost—" Her fingers rose unconsciously to the scarred side of her face. "Well, you can see what I lost." "I'm sorry," Jessie said, the words feeling woefully inadequate. Kiona's gaze snapped back to him, suddenly sharp. "Don't be. I'm not. Scars mean survival, not failure." A hint of defiance entered her voice. "I'm still here. The ranch is still here. That counts for something." "It counts for everything," Jessie replied with quiet intensity. Something shifted in Kiona's expression, a slight softening, a lowering of defenses. "This arrangement between our families," she said after a moment, "what do you truly think of it?" The directness of the question caught Jesse off guard, though he should have expected no less from her. He considered his response carefully, aware that platitudes or evasions would likely end whatever fragile connection they were building. "I think," he began slowly, "that it's a bargain made by desperate men for different reasons. My father wants land and legacy. Yours wants security and dignity. Neither considered what we might want." "And what do you want, Jesse Hawkins?" Kiona asked, her dark eyes steady on his. Jesse found himself at a rare loss for words. What did he want? Freedom from his father's iron control? Purpose beyond accumulating more acres, more cattle, more wealth? Connection that went deeper than business and obligation? "I want," he finally said, "to build something that's mine. Not my father's vision, not his legacy continued through me, but something I can look at and know came from my own mind and hands." He met her gaze directly. "And I suspect you want something similar." Kiona didn't answer immediately, weighing his words. "I want to preserve what my grandfather and father built," she said at last, "but also to make it stronger, better, different." She traced the rim of her cup with one finger. "The world doesn't stand still. Those who refuse to adapt disappear." "Like the buffalo," Jesse said quietly. Kiona's eyes flickered with something, recognition perhaps, that he understood more than she'd given him credit for. Yes, like the buffalo. The conversation shifted then to more practical matters. The daily operations of their respective ranches, the challenges of the coming winter, the regional politics that affected cattle prices. Jesse found himself increasingly drawn into Kiona's quick intelligence and pragmatic perspective. She spoke about ranching, not with his father's ruthless calculation or the romantic notions of Eastern writers, but with the clear-eyed understanding of someone who respected the land enough to work with it rather than against it. "You should see our northern pasture," she said, warming to the subject. "The grasses there are different, thicker, more resilient. Something in the soil, perhaps. The cattle that graze there produce calves with better winter survival rates." "I'd like that," Jesse said, surprising himself with his sincerity. "To see it, I mean." Kiona studied him for a moment, then nodded decisively. "The tea is getting cold, and daylight won't last forever. If you have time, we could ride out there now." The suggestion was practical, not romantic, but Jesse felt a surge of anticipation nonetheless. "I'd like nothing better." While Kiona readied her mare, a compact, intelligent-looking bay named Willow, Jesse waited in the yard, watching how she moved with the horse, murmuring to it softly in a language he didn't recognize. Probably Blackfoot, he realized, a connection to her mother's heritage that survived despite the complicated relationship Owen had mentioned. They rode side by side across the eastern fields, Kiona pointing out features of the land with the confidence of someone who knew every rise and hollow. Jesse listened and observed, struck by how differently she saw the same landscape he had ridden past countless times without truly seeing. "There," she said, gesturing toward a natural depression where the grass grew thicker and greener than the surrounding area. "We call this the cradle. It catches rainwater and holds moisture longer than the higher ground. In dry years, it's the difference between survival and ruin." "My father would have dammed it," Jesse remarked, "turned it into a proper stock pond." Kiona shook her head. "That would destroy the natural flow. The water needs to seep slowly through the soil, nourishing everything downslope." She glanced at him. "Not everything needs to be controlled to be valuable." The observation hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond land management. As they created a small rise, the northern pasture spread before them, a sweep of land that looked subtly different from the surrounding terrain. The grass had a bluish cast, and it moved differently in the wind, more resilient, less brittle. "It's beautiful," Jesse said, genuinely impressed. "It's useful," Kiona replied, but there was pride in her voice. "This is where we bring the breeding stock when feed is scarce. The calves born from cows that graze here are stronger, healthier." Jesse dismounted, kneeling to examine the grass more closely. "I've never seen this variety before, at least not growing so abundantly." Kiona slid from her saddle to join him, her nearness sending an unexpected awareness through him. "My grandfather called it ghost grass. His people believed it grew where sacred springs ran deep underground." "Is that true? Underground springs?" She smiled slightly. "I've found that when old stories persist, there's usually some kernel of natural truth in them. The soil here is different, darker, richer. Perhaps there is water deep below." They walked a short distance, leading their horses, as Kiona pointed out other features of the pasture. The natural windbreaks formed by rock outcroppings, the subtle variations in elevation that created microclimates favorable to different forage plants. "You know this land like most people know their own reflection," Jesse observed. Kiona glanced at him, a hint of wry humor in her eyes. "Some of us spend less time looking in mirrors than others." The self-deprecating reference to her scars surprised him. Before he could think better of it, Jesse said, "Their loss. There's more worth seeing in your face than in most I encounter." He regretted the words immediately, fearing they would sound like empty flattery or, worse, pity. But Kiona didn't flinch or withdraw. She simply regarded him steadily, assessing his sincerity. "You're an unexpected man, Jesse Hawkins," she finally said. "Is that good or bad?" he asked, relieved she hadn't taken offense. "I haven't decided yet." But there was a lightness in her tone that hadn't been there before. They remounted and rode toward a stand of cottonwood trees that marked the boundary between Nakota Creek and the next property. The afternoon light had softened, casting long shadows across the grass and illuminating dust motes in golden shafts between the trees. "This is as far as Lakota land goes," Kiona said, reining in at the tree line. "Beyond is Whitefeather territory." "Nez Perce family, right?" Jesse asked. "I met the oldest son at a cattle auction." Kiona nodded. "Good neighbors, they keep to themselves mostly, but they've helped us when needed." She hesitated, then added, "They'll be at the wedding." The mention of the ceremony, now less than 2 weeks away, brought reality crashing back. This peaceful afternoon, this growing understanding between them, existed in the shadow of an arrangement neither had chosen. "Kiona," Jesse began, not entirely sure what he wanted to say, but feeling the need to acknowledge the situation. "I know this isn't—" A distant sound interrupted him. The crack of a rifle, followed by shouts. Both their horses tensed, ears pricked forward. "That came from Whitefeather land," Kiona said, an alarm flashing across her face. Without hesitation, she urged Willow forward, breaking from the tree line into a gallop across the neighboring property. Jesse followed immediately, catching up to ride alongside her. "Could be hunting," he shouted over the drumming of hooves. "Not there," Kiona called back. "That's too close to their house." They created a small hill and saw the source of the commotion. 3 riders on horseback were circling the Whitefeather corral, where several prized horses had been gathered. An older man, Jesse recognized him as Joseph Whitefeather, stood by the fence with a rifle, shouting at the mounted men to leave his property. "Rustlers," Jesse muttered, spurring Tempest. "Faster! Worse!" Kiona replied grimly. "Sawtooth mining men. See the yellow bandanas." As they drew closer, Jesse could make out the distinctive yellow neckerchiefs the riders wore, the unofficial uniform of the workers from Sawtooth Mining Company, an operation that had begun buying up failing ranches to the west for their water, rights and mineral deposits. "What are they doing this far east?" Jesse asked as they approached the confrontation. "Testing boundaries," Kiona replied. Seeing who they can intimidate, they pulled their horses to a stop at the edge of the Whitefeather yard. Joseph Whitefeather stood his ground, rifle raised but not fired, while his teenage son Eli flanked him with a pitchfork. The three sawtooth men hadn't drawn weapons, but their posture was menacing as they circled on horseback. "Your land's worthless. Without water access, old man," one of the riders was saying. "Boss says you'd be smart to sell now while the offer's good." "My grandfather is buried on this land," Joseph replied, his voice steady despite the tension in his stance. "My grandson will be born on it. We don't sell." "Stubbornness runs in you people," another rider sneered, "always fighting the inevitable." "Is there a problem here?" Jesse called out, making his presence known. The sawtooth men turned, surprise, and then wariness crossing their faces as they recognized Hawkins. Jesse's family name carried weight, even among those who worked for rival interests. "No problem," the lead rider said, his tone suddenly less aggressive. "Just having a conversation about progress with Mr. Whitefeather here." "Looked more like trespassing and harassment from where I stood," Jesse replied coldly. "We're just messengers," the man said, spreading his hands in a gesture of false innocence. "Boss wants to make a fair offer for this played-out patch of dirt." Joseph Whitefeather's expression remained impassive, but Jesse could see the anger and worry in his eyes. Like many smaller ranchers, the Whitefeathers operated on narrow margins. A few bad seasons could push them to the brink. Exactly the vulnerability Sawtooth Mining exploited. "Your message has been delivered," Kiona spoke, her voice carrying surprising authority. "And declined. Now you're just 3 men outnumbered on someone else's property." The Sawtooth riders exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the situation. What had seemed a simple intimidation of an aging rancher and his son had become more complicated with witnesses, especially witnesses with Hawkins' connection. "We'll be going then," the leader said with a mocking tip of his hat. "But this conversation isn't over, Whitefeather. Nobody holds out against Sawtooth forever." "Some things are worth fighting for," Joseph replied simply. The riders turned their horses and trotted away, but not before the leader cast a calculating look at Kiona that made Jesse's blood run cold. "You know them?" he asked quietly when the men were out of earshot. Kiona's expression was grim. "Not personally, but I know their type. They started west of here, picking off the weakest ranches first, working their way east." Joseph Whitefeather approached, lowering his rifle. "Miss Lakota, Mr. Hawkins, I'm grateful for your timely arrival." "Is everyone all right?" Kiona asked, dismounting to stand eye level with the older man. Joseph nodded, the lines in his weathered face deepening with concern. "This time, but they'll be back." He glanced toward his modest house, where a pregnant young woman, his daughter-in-law, Jessie presumed, watched anxiously from the porch. "My son is in town. If you hadn't come along—" "Has Sawtooth approached you formally?" Jessie asked, joining them on the ground. "3 times now. Each offer is lower than the last." Joseph's mouth tightened. "They don't want to pay a fair price. They want to surrender." Kiona touched the older man's arm lightly. "You should come to the gathering after the ceremony. Bring your family. There's strength in the community." Jesse glanced at her, surprised by the invitation and the quiet authority with which she extended it. This was a side of Kiona he hadn't seen before. A natural leader, respected by her neighbors despite her youth and the isolation her scars had imposed. Joseph inclined his head. "We will come." He looked between them, something knowing in his dark eyes. "The joining of Hawkins and Lakota makes Sawtooth nervous. They expected to pick us off one by one." "They'll have to reconsider that strategy," Jesse said firmly, though privately he wondered what his father's position on Sawtooth. Mining might be. Emmett Hawkins was not above selling to the highest bidder if the price was right. They stayed long enough to ensure the Sawtooth men had truly departed, then began the ride back to Nakota Creek as the sun dipped lower toward the western mountains. They rode in companionable silence for a time, both processing the confrontation they'd witnessed. "That's why my father agreed to the arrangement," Kiona said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "Not just the debts, though those are real enough. He's afraid of Sawtooth, afraid of what happens to the land, to our neighbors, if we lose Nakota Creek." Jesse considered this new perspective, and a connection to Hawkins offers protection. "Your father's name carries weight," Kiona acknowledged. "For better or worse." "Mostly worse, if you ask some people," Jesse said dryly. Kiona gave him a sideways glance. "Your father is feared, but fear isn't the only kind of strength." She nudged Willow closer to Tempest, their legs nearly touching as they rode. "What I saw back there, how you faced down those men without threats or violence, that's a different kind of power." The simple observation, delivered without flattery or agenda, struck Jesse more deeply than any praise he'd received from his father. "I'm not him," he said quietly. "I don't want to be." "Good," Kiona replied. "The territory doesn't need another Emmett Hawkins." Her voice softened slightly. "But it might need you." As they created the final rise before Nakota Creek Ranch came into view, Jesse reined in, looking out over the land that would soon be joined with his family's holdings, not through conquest or manipulation, but through a union between two people who were beginning, against all odds, to see each other clearly. "Thank you," he said, "for showing me your land today, for helping me see it through your eyes." Kiona studied him, the setting sun casting half her face in golden light, the other in shadow, both sides equally compelling to him now. "Perhaps next time," she said with the barest hint of a smile, "you can show me yours." The simple suggestion, with its promise of future conversations and shared understanding, felt more significant than any formal agreement his father had engineered. As they rode the final distance to the Lakota ranch house, Jesse realized that what had begun as an unwanted obligation was transforming, slowly but undeniably, into something he found himself wanting to pursue of his own accord. Not for land or legacy, but for the chance to know the remarkable woman who rode beside him, and perhaps in time to become the kind of man worthy of her respect. The days following Jesse's visit to Nakota Creek took on a strange, dreamlike quality. He went about his duties at the Hawkins Ranch with mechanical precision, inspecting fences, overseeing cattle rotation, reviewing supply inventories for winter, but his mind continually drifted eastward to Kiona. Their encounter with the Sawtooth. Men had revealed layers to her he hadn't anticipated. Her quiet authority, her natural leadership among neighbors, her fierce protectiveness of the land and community. These qualities both intrigued and challenged him, making him increasingly aware of the gap between the man he was and the man he wanted to be. Emmett noticed his son's distraction during their evening meal 4 days before the wedding, his shrewd eyes narrowing as Jesse pushed food around his plate without eating. "You've been riding out every afternoon this week," Emmett observed, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. "Checking the eastern boundaries, Thompson tells me." Jesse met his father's gaze evenly. "Among other things." "Other things including the Lakota girl, I presume." There was no point denying it. "Her name is Kiona." Emmett set down his knife and fork with deliberate care. "I'm aware of her name. What I'm less clear on is why you're spending so much time at Nakota Creek before the contracts are finalized." "Maybe I want to know the woman I'm marrying," Jesse said, unable to keep a hint of challenge from his voice. "A noble sentiment," Emmett replied with the faintest trace of mockery. "Unnecessary but noble." He reached for his wine glass. "Just remember what matters in this arrangement: the land, the water rights, the buffer against Sawtooth's expansion." Jesse's head snapped up. "You know about Sawtooth?" "Of course I know." Emmett said, his tone suggesting the question was barely worth answering. Carson at the bank keeps me informed of all significant movements in the territory. Sawtooth been buying up distressed properties for over a year now. Then you know they're threatening the Whitefeathers and likely have their eye on Nakota Creek. Emmett shrugged one massive shoulder. Business is business. The weak fall to the strong. It's the natural order of things. There's nothing natural about forcing people off land they've worked for generations, Jesse argued, his appetite completely gone now. Sentiment, Emmett dismissed. The territory is changing, Jesse. Those who adapt survive. Those who cling to the past disappear. He fixed his son with a penetrating stare. Which is precisely why our arrangement with the Lakotas is sound strategy. We preserve what's valuable, the land, the water, the breeding stock, while discarding what's obsolete. And what's obsolete in your calculation? Jesse asked quietly. The people? Their history? Their connection to the land? Emmett's expression hardened. Don't confuse business with emotion. That's always been your weakness. And yours has been confusing control with strength, Jesse retorted before he could stop himself. A dangerous stillness came over Emmett's face, the calm before a storm that Jesse had witnessed many times throughout his childhood. But instead of the expected explosion, his father merely dabbed his mouth with a napkin and stood. Marry the girl, secure the property, continue the Hawkins legacy, he said, each word precise as a bullet. Everything else is a distraction. He left Jesse alone at the massive dining table, surrounded by empty chairs that had once, many years ago, held family and friends before Emmett's ambition had gradually isolated them from everyone who couldn't advance his interests. The next morning dawned cold and clear, the first real bite of winter in the air. Jesse rose early, his breath fogging in his bedroom as he dressed in layers. Wool shirt, leather vest, heavy jacket. The wedding was just 3 days away now, and he felt an increasing urgency to understand both Kiona and himself before they were bound together by law and obligation. He was saddling Tempest when May appeared in the stable doorway. A package, wrapped in brown paper tucked under one arm. Early start again, she observed, her dark eyes missing nothing. Jesse tightened the cinch strap. Thought I'd ride out to the North Valley. Check the windbreak before the weather turns. May's expression suggested she wasn't fooled by the causal explanation. The North Valley, which happens to share a boundary with Nakota Creek, Jesse gave her a wry smile. Maybe. May approached, holding out the package. Take this then. Fresh bread and preserves. No sense calling on a household empty-handed. Jesse accepted the package, touched by the gesture. Thank you. May studied him for a long moment. You've changed this past week, she said finally. There's something different in your eyes. Is that good or bad? Jesse asked, echoing the question he'd posed to Kiona days earlier. That depends. May replied, on whether you're changing because you want to or because someone else wants you to. Jesse considered her words as he secured the package in his saddlebag. What if it's both? What if meeting someone makes you want to be more than you've been? A small smile touched May's lips. Then that's not changed. That's growth. She patted Tempest's neck and stepped back. Give my regards to Miss Lakota. Jesse rode out as the sun created the eastern hills, casting long shadows across the frosted grass. The cold air felt cleansing, scrubbing away the lingering unease of his conversation with his father. By the time he approached the boundary of Nakota Creek, his mind had settled into a calm determination. He wasn't expecting the column of smoke. At first, he thought it might be chimney smoke from the Lakota house, but as he created the final ridge, he realized it was larger, darker, and coming from the wrong direction. The northern pasture, where Kiona had shown him the special ghost grass that sustained their breeding stock, was burning. Jesse spurred Tempest into a gallop, fear clutching at his chest. As he drew closer, he could see figures moving against the flames. 2, maybe 3 people with blankets and buckets, fighting a losing battle against a fire that had already consumed a significant portion of the pasture. He recognized Kiona immediately, even at a distance. She was at the front line of the fire, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled up, wielding a wet blanket with grim determination. Beside her, Owen Lakota worked despite his age, his movements betraying exhaustion. Jesse rode straight to them, leaping from Tempest before the horse had fully stopped. "What happened?" he shouted over the crackling flames. Kiona turned, surprise flashing across her face. "Jesse!" Sweat and soot streaked her skin, and her hands were red and blistered from the heat. "It started at dawn, the northern fence line." "Accident?" Jesse asked, already stripping off his jacket to help. Owen Lakota's expression was grim. "Didn't start itself." The implication was clear. After the confrontation with the Sawtooth men, this was hardly a coincidence. "Where are your hands?" Jesse asked, looking around for the ranch workers who should have been helping. "Carlson's getting more water," Kiona explained, beating at a flaring edge of the fire. "Williams is in town getting help." She didn't add what was obvious, that 2 hired hands were all the Lakotas could afford now. "We need to create a fire break," Jesse said, assessing the situation quickly. "The wind's pushing it east. If we clear a strip along that ridge, we might contain it." Kiona nodded, already thinking the same way. "There are tools in the shed by the corral. I'll get them," Owen offered, but Jesse could see the older man was near exhaustion. "No, sir, you show me where. You stay with Kiona." Too tired to argue, Owen gave quick directions. Jesse sprinted to Tempest and rode the 1/4 mile to the corral at a gallop. He returned minutes later with shovels, pickaxes, and a coil of rope. The next 2 hours, they fought the fire with everything they had. Jesse and Carlson, the Lakota's weathered ranch hand, dug frantically to create a fire break, while Kiona and her father battled the leading edge of the flames. When Williams returned with several men from neighboring properties, they formed a bucket line from the creek to the fire's edge. Jesse lost all sense of time, aware only of burning lungs, aching muscles, and Kiona's relentless presence beside him. Whenever he glanced her way, she was there, soot-streaked, exhausted, but utterly determined. Once, when a sudden shift in the wind sent flames leaping toward them, he grabbed her arm and pulled her back just before fire scorched the ground, where she'd been standing. Their eyes met for a brief moment, mutual concern flashing between them before they returned to the fight. By mid-afternoon, they had contained the fire, though smoking patches still required vigilance. The northern pasture, Kiona's precious ghost grass, was largely destroyed, a blackened scar across land that had once represented the Lakota ranch's best hope for survival. Jesse found Kiona standing at the edge of the burned area, staring out at the devastation with an expression that broke something in his chest. This wasn't just land to her. It was heritage, hope, future, all now reduced to ash. He approached quietly, offering a canteen of water. "You should drink." She accepted it without looking at him, taking a small sip before passing it back. "Thank you for coming, for helping." "I was already on my way to see you," Jesse admitted. "I saw the smoke from the ridge." Kiona nodded absently, her eyes still fixed on the blackened landscape. "The breeding stock," she said quietly. "Without the ghost grass to winter them." She didn't need to finish the thought. Without their best pasture, the Lakotas would struggle to maintain the quality herd they'd worked so hard to develop. More cattle would likely be lost over the winter. More debt would accumulate. The spiral that had driven Owen to accept Emmett's arrangement would only accelerate. "We'll figure something out," Jesse said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Now Kiona did look at him, her expression a complex mixture of gratitude and wariness. We, the simple question hung between them, weighted with significance. Before today, their conversations had acknowledged the upcoming marriage as a business arrangement, a means to an end for both their families. But now, standing amid the smoking ruins of Nakoda Creek's future, the word "we" carried a different resonance. "Yes," Jesse said quietly. "We." Something shifted in Kiona's eyes. Not surrender, but perhaps a willingness to share the burden she'd carried alone for so long. She turned back to the burned pasture, her shoulder nearly touching his. "It was deliberate," she said after a moment. "We found coal oil cans along the fence line." Jesse's jaw tightened. "Sawtooth." "Most likely, though they'll deny it, of course." Her voice was flat with exhaustion. "It's what they do. Create impossible situations, then offer to help by buying people out." Jesse looked across to where Owen sat on an overturned bucket, his head in his hands, the picture of defeat. The older man had fought to preserve his family's land through drought, illness, and financial hardship, only to face this final devastating blow days before the arrangement that was supposed to save them. "The timing isn't coincidental," Jesse observed. 3 days before the wedding. Kiona gave him a sharp glance. "What do you mean?" "They're trying to destroy what makes Nakoda Creek valuable before it becomes part of Hawkins Holdings." Jesse ran a hand through his soot-streaked hair. "They want you desperate enough to sell immediately, before Saturday." Understanding dawned in Kiona's eyes. "Or they want your father to reconsider the arrangement, now that the best pasture is gone." "That won't happen," Jesse said with certainty. "My father never backs out of a deal once papers are signed. It's a matter of pride." "Pride," Kiona echoed, a weary note in her voice. "That's what got us here in the first place. My father's pride, your father's pride. Pieces on a board they move around." "Not anymore," Jesse said firmly. She looked at him questioningly. "This changes things," he continued. "Not the marriage. That, still happens Saturday. But what comes after?" A plan was forming in his mind, pieces falling into place with surprising clarity. If Sawtooth is willing to go this far before the wedding, they won't stop after. We need to be ready. "Ready how?" Kiona asked, a hint of her usual sharpness returning despite her exhaustion. "I have an idea," Jesse said, "but I'll need to speak with my father." Wariness crept into Kiona's expression. "Your father is part of the problem, not the solution." "True," Jesse acknowledged. "But he's also the most powerful rancher in the territory, with connections throughout the state. If we can convince him that fighting Sawtooth serves his interests—" He let the implication hang, using his pride against them, Kiona said slowly. "It might work." She regarded him with new respect. "You understand him well." "I've had 28 years of practice," Jesse replied with a grimace. "Not all of it pleasant." A ghost of a smile touched Kiona's lips. "I imagine not." The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted them. They turned to see a rider approaching from the direction of Mill Creek, the doctor, Jesse realized, as the figure came closer. "Your forehead's bleeding," Kiona said suddenly, reaching up without thinking to brush aside a lock of hair stuck to his skin with dried blood. The unexpected touch sent warmth through Jesse, despite his exhaustion. "It's nothing." "Burns and cuts." "Confesta," she countered, practical as always. "Let Dr. Thompson look at it when he's done with the others." Jesse caught her hand before she could withdraw it, holding it gently between his own. Her fingers were reddened from heat and work, small blisters forming on her palms. "Your hands need more attention than my head." Kiona looked down at their joined hands, vulnerability flickering across her face before she mastered it. "I've had worse. That doesn't mean you should suffer needlessly now," Jesse said quietly. Something unspoken passed between them in that moment, understanding, perhaps, that they had crossed some invisible threshold. The fire had burned away pretense, leaving only the essential truth. They were in this together now, whether by choice or circumstance. As the doctor dismounted nearby, Kiona gently withdrew her hand. "You should speak with your father tonight," she said, practical once more. "If Sawtooth thinks they've succeeded in disrupting our arrangement, they might move against other properties next." Jesse nodded. "I'll ride back once I know you and your father are taken care of." "We'll manage," Kiona said, the familiar self-reliance returning to her voice. "I know you will," Jesse replied. "But you don't have to manage alone anymore." The simple statement seemed to affect Kiona more deeply than any grand declaration could have. For a brief moment, the composed facade she maintained so carefully cracked, revealing the weight she had carried for years. "Thank you," she said softly, "for understanding what this land means to us." "Not just to you," Jesse said, looking out over the smoking pasture with new eyes. "To all of us who choose to make our lives here. This isn't just about property or profits. It's about a way of living that's worth protecting." Kiona studied him, as if seeing some new facet she hadn't noticed before. "You surprise me, Jesse." "Hawkins." "Good," he replied with a faint smile. "I'd hate to be predictable." The faintest hint of an answering smile touched her lips before she turned to greet the doctor, once again the capable daughter of Nakota Creek, showing no trace of the vulnerability she had momentarily revealed. Jesse watched her go, aware that something fundamental had shifted between them amid the smoke and struggle of the day. What had begun as his father's arrangement, an obligation to be endured, had become something he now chose freely, with clear eyes and full understanding of what it might cost and what it might offer. The ride back to Hawkins Ranch took longer than usual, Tempest tired from the day's exertions and Jesse's own body aching from hours of fighting the fire. Night had fallen by the time he passed through the main gates, the windows of the big house glowing with lamplight against the darkness. May met him at the door, her expression shifting from relief to concern as she took in his soot-streaked appearance, and the small bandage at his temple where Dr. Thompson had insisted on cleaning and covering the cut. "Merciful heavens," she exclaimed, "what happened to you?" "Fire at Nakota Creek," Jesse explained, handing her his ruined jacket. "The northern pasture." May's eyes widened. "The Lakotas, are they—" "They're all right," Jesse assured her. "Exhausted, the doctor's with them now." He glanced toward his father's study, where light showed beneath the door. "Is he in there?" May nodded, her expression growing concerned. "Been in a foul mood all day. Some letters came from Carson at the bank." Jesse's suspicions solidified. If Emmett had received news about the fire or Sawtooth's involvement, his reaction would depend entirely on how he perceived it affecting his interests. "I need to speak with him," Jesse said, starting toward the study door. May caught his arm. "You should clean up first, change clothes. Your father won't—" "No," Jesse interrupted gently. "He needs to see this, to understand what's happening." May studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You've made up your mind about something." It wasn't a question, but Jesse answered anyway. "Yes, I have." He knocked once on the study door, then entered without waiting for a response. Emmett sat behind his massive desk, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed a document in the pool of light cast by his desk lamp. He looked up, irritation at the interruption clear in his expression before he registered his son's appearance. "What the devil happened to you?" he demanded, setting aside the paper. "Sawtooth mining happened," Jesse replied, remaining standing before the desk. "They set fire to the Lakota's northern pasture this morning, the special grazing land that makes their breeding program valuable." Emmett removed his glasses, his expression calculating rather than surprised. "Carson sent word about the fire, didn't mention Sawtooth's involvement." "They left coal oil cans at the fence line," Jesse said. It wasn't exactly subtle. Circumstantial, Emmett dismissed. Could have been anyone with a grudge against Owen Lakota. It was Sawtooth, Jesse insisted. They're trying to devalue the property before it becomes part of Hawkins' holdings, or pressuring the Lakotas to sell before the wedding. Emmett leaned back in his chair, regarding his son with narrowed eyes. And this concerns you because... The casual dismissal ignited something in Jesse's chest. Because I fought that fire for 6 hours today. Because I saw what it did to land that should have been protected. Because in 3 days, I'm marrying into that family, and their concerns are mine now. Interesting, Emmett said, his tone deceptively mild. I arranged this marriage as a business transaction, and suddenly you're defending it as if it were a love match. This isn't about love, Jesse countered. It's about principles, about standing against those who think they can burn and bully their way to ownership of this valley. Emmett's expression remained skeptical. Noble sentiments. But business is business, son. If Sawtooth has weakened the Lakota position, perhaps our arrangement should be reconsidered. And there it was, exactly what Jesse had feared and expected. In his father's calculation, the reduced value of the northern pasture might justify renegotiating terms that had already pushed the Lakotas to the brink. The agreement stands, Jesse said firmly. As written. That's not your decision to make, Emmett replied, steel entering his voice. I negotiate the family's interests, not this time. Jesse placed both hands on the desk, leaning forward to meet his father's gaze directly. This time, I'm the one being bartered, and I say the agreement stands. Father and son stared at each other in tense silence, neither willing to back down. Finally, Emmett gave a thin smile that never reached his eyes. Your sudden loyalty to the Lakota girl is touching, he said. Unnecessary, but touching. This isn't just about Kiona, Jesse replied. It's about what kind of men we choose to be, what legacy we're building. He straightened, his decision crystallizing with unexpected clarity. If you try to use this fire to squeeze more concessions from the Lakotas, I'll walk away. From the arrangement, from the ranch, from all of it. Emmett's face darkened. You wouldn't dare. Try me, Jesse said quietly. I've spent my life following. Your lead, accepting your values, building your empire. But this is where I draw the line. Something shifted in Emmett's expression. Not softening exactly, but reassessment. He studied his son as if seeing him clearly for the first time. You've changed, he finally observed. Yes, Jesse agreed. I have. Emmett drummed his fingers on the desk, his tactician's mind visibly recalculating. What exactly are you proposing? We honor the original agreement. The wedding proceeds as planned, Jesse said, but we do more than that. We made it clear to Sawtooth and everyone else that attacking Nakota Creek was attacking Hawkins' interests. By doing what exactly? Jesse had been considering this question during the long ride home. We accelerate the property merger. Make it official immediately after the ceremony rather than waiting for the usual legal processes. And we increase our presence on the eastern boundary. More men, more patrols. Emmett's eyebrows rose slightly. That's a significant commitment of resources. It's an investment in our future, Jesse corrected. If we let Sawtooth get away with this, they'll only grow bolder. Today, it's the Lakota pasture. Tomorrow, it could be our water rights. He could see his father weighing the argument, assessing it not on moral grounds, but purely in terms of practical advantage. That was the key to persuading Emmett Hawkins, appealing not to his heart, but to his strategic mind. There's merit in your reasoning, Emmett finally conceded. A strong response now might discourage further encroachment. It wasn't a warm endorsement, but it was enough. Jesse nodded, accepting the qualified victory. Then we're agreed, the wedding proceeds, and we accelerate the property merger? Emmett regarded his son thoughtfully. Agreed. Though I'm more interested in what's behind this sudden assertiveness than in Sawtooth's petty tactics. Jesse met his father's penetrating gaze steadily. Let's just say, I've found something worth fighting for. As he left the study, Jesse felt a sense of purpose he had rarely experienced before. The fire at Nakota Creek had been meant to divide and weaken, to force desperate decisions. Instead, it had clarified his path forward and strengthened his resolve. In 3 days, he would marry Kiona Lakota, not just because a contract demanded it, but because standing beside her against those who threatened their way of life felt like the first truly right choice he had made in years. Dawn broke clear and cold on the day before the wedding. Jesse rode out early, before most of the ranch hands had even stirred from their bunks. He carried with him not only May's basket of fresh bread and preserves, but also a leather portfolio containing documents he'd spent half the night preparing. The Lakota ranch appeared subdued in the pale morning light. Smoke still drifted occasionally from hot spots in the northern pasture, and the acrid smell of burnt grass hung in the air. As Jesse approached the main house, he saw Owen sitting on the porch steps, a cup of coffee cradled in weathered hands. "Morning, Mr. Lakota," Jesse called, dismounting and tethering Tempest to the hitching post. Owen nodded in greeting, his face etched with exhaustion but his eyes clear. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon. Thought you might need an extra." "A pair of hands today," Jesse replied, climbing the steps to join the older man. "How are you holding up?" Owen's gaze drifted toward the blackened pasture. "Had worse days. Had better ones, too." He took a sip of his coffee. "Kiona's been up since before light, recalculating feed stores for winter." "That sounds like her," Jesse said with a small smile. Practical to the core, something softened in Owen's expression. "Gets that from her mother. Never met a problem she couldn't figure a way around." It was the first time Owen had mentioned Kiona's mother in a personal way, and Jesse felt a small door opening between them. "I'd like to hear more about her someday," he said quietly. "If you're ever inclined to share." Owen studied him for a long moment. "You know, when Emmett Hawkins proposed this arrangement, I expected his son to be just like him, all business, no heart." He shook his head slowly. "Seems I was wrong." Before Jesse could respond, the front door opened, and Kiona appeared. She wore a simple work dress, with her hair braided down her back, and despite the shadows of exhaustion beneath her eyes, she carried herself with the same quiet dignity Jesse had come to admire. "Jesse," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "I didn't think you'd—" She stopped, collecting herself. "Good morning." "Morning," he replied, suddenly aware of Owen watching their interaction with shrewd eyes. "I brought some things from May, and I wanted to talk to you both about some ideas for moving forward." Kiona's eyebrow rose slightly. "You spoke with your father?" "I did," Jesse confirmed, "and while he's still very much himself, he's agreed to accelerate the property merger after the ceremony. Full legal integration, effective immediately." Owen straightened, setting his coffee cup aside. "That's unexpected." "Strategic," Jesse corrected. "My father recognizes that a unified front against Sawtooth serves his interests." "His interests," Kiona echoed, a hint of skepticism in her tone. "Not ours." "In this case they align," Jesse said. "He wants to protect his investment. We want to protect your land and way of life. The method is the same, even if the motivation differs." Kiona considered this, then nodded once. "Pragmatic." "I've been watching you," Jesse said with a small smile. "Some of it must be rubbing off." The faint, answering smile that touched her lips warmed something in his chest. It was still rare to see Kiona's guard lower, even briefly, and each instance felt like a victory. "Come inside," she said, holding the door open. "I've made more coffee and you can show us what you brought." The kitchen was warm and fragrant, with the scent of cornbread baking in the oven. Maps and ledgers were spread across the table, evidence of Kiona's early morning calculations. She cleared a space while Jesse unpacked May's basket and retrieved his portfolio. "First things first," he said, laying out several documents. "These are the revised merger agreements. They transfer Nakota Creek's holdings to the combined Hawkins-Lakota property immediately following the ceremony, rather than phasing in over 6 months as originally planned." Owen reached for his reading glasses, examining the papers with careful attention. "And the operational independence we discussed? Preserved," Jesse assured him. "You'll maintain day-to-day management of Nakota Creek operations, with Kiona overseeing the books as she has been." Kiona leaned forward, scanning the documents with a quick, practiced eye. "The profit-sharing terms are unchanged?" "Unchanged. And guaranteed," Jesse confirmed, 15% of combined operations paid quarterly." Owen sat back, a hint of suspicion still lingering in his expression. Why the sudden generosity from Emmett Hawkins? Man doesn't accelerate payments without reason. Jesse met the older man's gaze directly. "Because I told him I'd walk away from everything, the marriage, the ranch, my inheritance, if he tried to use the fire to squeeze further concessions from you." Silence fell over the kitchen. Owen and Kiona exchanged a glance that Jesse couldn't quite interpret. "You threatened your father?" Kiona finally asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Over us?" "Over what's right," Jesse corrected. "Sawtooth tried to manipulate both our families. I won't let them succeed." Owen studied Jesse with new eyes, reassessing the young man before him. After a long moment, he nodded slightly and returned to reviewing the documents. "Now," Jesse continued, unrolling a map of the combined properties, "I've been thinking about how to handle the loss of the northern pasture." Kiona's expression tightened at the mention of her beloved ghost grass. "But," she leaned in to examine the map, "we've been calculating feed requirements. Without the northern pasture, we'll need to reduce the breeding herd by at least 1/3 to make it through winter. Or," Jesse countered, pointing to a section of Hawkins' land on the western boundary, "we could relocate them here." Owen and Kiona both looked at the indicated area with surprise. "The high meadow?" Owen asked. "That's prime Hawkins' grazing land," Jesse nodded. "It is. And while it doesn't have your ghost grass, it's sheltered from the worst winter winds and has a reliable spring that rarely freezes. The breeding herd would do well there." "Your father agreed to this?" Kiona asked, skepticism clear in her voice. "Not exactly," Jesse admitted. "He agreed to the accelerated merger and increased security along the boundaries. This particular detail I'm handling myself." Understanding dawned in Kiona's eyes. "You're making this decision without his explicit approval." "The merger gives me authority to allocate resources across the combined property," Jesse explained. "I'm allocating them where they'll do the most good." A moment of silence followed as the implications sank in. Jesse was not only standing up to his father, but actively carving out independent decision-making authority within the constraints of their arrangement. "Bold move," Owen finally said, a hint of appreciation in his voice. "Necessary one," Jesse replied simply. Kiona was still studying the map, her practical mind already calculating distances and requirements. The herd would need to be moved soon, before the first heavy snow. "I thought we could start tomorrow," Jesse suggested, "after the ceremony." Kiona looked up sharply. "Tomorrow? But the wedding dinner can wait," Jesse finished. "This is more important." Something shifted in Kiona's expression, surprise giving way to a deeper emotion Jesse couldn't quite name. "Most brides don't spend their wedding day moving cattle," she observed, a hint of dry humor in her voice. "I suspect you're not like most brides," Jesse replied with a smile. "And this isn't like most marriages." "No," she agreed softly. "It isn't." Their eyes held for a moment before Owen cleared his throat, reminding them of his presence. "Well then," the older man said, folding the documents carefully. "Seems we have plans to make." They spent the morning mapping out the details. Which cattle, would move first, what supplies would be needed, which hands could be spared from each ranch. Kiona's practical knowledge complemented Jesse's resources, and together they crafted a workable plan that would preserve the breeding program the Lakotas had worked so hard to develop. As midday approached, Kiona excused herself to check on the bread in the oven, leaving Jesse and Owen alone at the table. "I owe you an apology," Owen said quietly, once his daughter was out of earshot. "I misjudged you." Jesse shook his head. "You had no reason to think well of the Hawkins name. My father's reputation is well earned." "But you're not him," Owen observed. "I'm trying not to be," Jesse agreed, "though it's not always easy to see a different path when you've been following one your whole life." Owen nodded, understanding in his weathered face. "Pathfinding is a Lakota skill," he said with the ghost of a smile. "Perhaps my daughter can teach you something about that." "She already has," Jesse admitted, "more than she knows." Owen studied him for a long moment. "You care for her," he said. It wasn't a question. Jesse considered deflecting, but found he couldn't. "Not here, not now, with the wedding less than 24 hours away." "Yes," he said simply. "I do." "Despite the scars?" Owen pressed, his gaze sharp. "Because of who she is," Jesse corrected firmly. "All of her. Strength, intelligence, determination. The scars are just part of her story, not the whole of it." Something like approval flickered in Owen's eyes. "Good answer." He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "She won't make it easy for you, too used to standing alone." "I'm not looking for easy," Jesse replied. "Just worthwhile." When Kiona returned with fresh cornbread and honey, she found the two men in companionable silence, the tension that had marked earlier interactions noticeably absent. After the meal, Jesse helped Owen check the remaining hotspots in the northern pasture, while Kiona rode to inform their few ranch hands of the new plan. By late afternoon, preparations were well underway for both the ceremony and the cattle move that would follow. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Jesse and Kiona found themselves alone on the porch, watching the changing light paint the landscape in gold and amber. "You should head back," Kiona said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "It's getting late, and tomorrow will be a long day." Jesse nodded but made no move to leave. "I wanted to ask you something first." Kiona turned to face him, curiosity in her dark eyes. "Yes? Are you at peace with this?" he asked carefully. "What happens tomorrow?" She considered the question seriously, her gaze drifting out over the land that had shaped her life. "A week ago, I would have said I was resigned to it, accepting necessity." Her voice softened. "Now, it feels less like an ending and more like a beginning." The simple honesty of her answer moved him more than any elaborate declaration could have. "That's how I see it too," he said quietly. Kiona studied him, the setting sun casting half her face in golden light, the other in shadow, both sides equally compelling to him now. "I never expected this," she admitted, "to look forward rather than backward, to see possibility instead of obligation." "Neither did I," Jesse said. "But here we are." A small smile touched her lips. "Here we are," she echoed. The moment stretched between them, waited with things still unspoken but no longer unfelt. Jesse found himself wanting to reach for her hand, to bridge the physical distance between them as they had begun to bridge the emotional one. But something held him back. Not reluctance, but a sense that some thresholds were best crossed in their proper time, and their time would be tomorrow. "I should go," he said finally, rising from his seat. "Preparations to make." Kiona nodded, standing as well. "Until tomorrow, then." "Until tomorrow," Jesse agreed. As he rode back toward Hawkins' ranch, the sunset blazing across the western sky, Jesse felt a strange sense of completion. What had begun as his father's arrangement, a business transaction disguised as a marriage, had transformed into something he now chose freely and fully. Tomorrow he would wed Kiona Lakota, not because a contract demanded it, but because standing beside her against whatever challenges came felt like the most natural choice in the world. The Saito ranch house was ablaze with light when Jesse returned, unusual activity evident even from a distance. As he approached, he saw unfamiliar horses at the hitching posts and a carriage he didn't recognize in the drive. May met him at the door, her expression a mixture of concern and resignation. "You have visitors," she said without preamble. "In the parlor with your father?" "Who?" Jesse began, but fell silent as the parlor door opened and Emmett emerged, accompanied by two men in expensive suits. "Ah, Jesse," Emmett called, his public voice booming with false joviality. "Come meet our guests, Mr. Harrington and Mr. Pike from Sawtooth Mining." Jesse froze, shock giving way to a cold anger as he recognized the names. Harrington was Sawtooth's legal representative and Pike its operations manager, the very men who would have authorized the fire at Nakota Creek. "Gentlemen," he acknowledged stiffly, making no move to offer his hand. "We were just discussing tomorrow's happy occasion," Emmett continued, his smile not reaching his eyes, "and some interesting business opportunities that might benefit all our parties." The implication was clear. Somehow Sawtooth had learned of Jesse's plans to accelerate the merger and move the Lakota breeding stock. Now they were here, making overtures to Emmett, attempting to drive a wedge between father and son on the eve of the wedding. "Indeed," Harrington said smoothly, his Eastern accent marking him as an outsider despite his Western attire. "We believe there may be ways to maximize the value of certain portions of the combined properties that might otherwise go underutilized." Jesse met the man's calculating gaze directly. "The northern pasture, you mean? The one that mysteriously caught fire yesterday?" Pike had the grace to look uncomfortable, but Harrington merely smiled. "Tragic accident, but perhaps an opportunity in disguise." "My son has a romantic attachment to the Lakota property," Emmett interjected, watching Jesse carefully. "He's not thinking in purely business terms at present." The challenge was clear. Emmett was testing Jesse's resolve, seeing if he would maintain his stance from the previous night now that Sawtooth representatives were physically present, offering what was likely a substantial sum. "Actually," Jesse said evenly, "I'm thinking in very practical terms, about family legacy, about community stability, about the kind of reputation the Hawkins name will carry for generations to come." He looked directly at his father. "Some things once sold can never be bought back." Tension crackled in the air as father and son locked gazes, the Sawtooth men forgotten for a moment as a deeper battle of wills played out. Finally, Emmett gave a tight smile. "My son makes a valid point, gentlemen. The Hawkins legacy is not measured solely in dollars." Relief flooded through Jesse, though he maintained his composed expression. His father hadn't fully capitulated, but he had backed Jesse's position, at least for now. "Perhaps we can revisit the discussion after the festivities," Harrington suggested smoothly, "once the properties are formally merged." "Perhaps," Emmett allowed, "though I should warn you, what belongs to Hawkins stays with Hawkins. We're not known for selling what's ours." The message, wrapped in politeness but clear nonetheless, sent the Sawtooth representatives on their way within the hour. As their carriage disappeared down the drive, Jesse turned to his father in the study doorway. "Thank you," he said simply. Emmett regarded him with an unreadable expression. "Don't thank me yet. I haven't decided what serves our interests best." "Our interests include more than profit," Jesse countered. "So you keep saying," Emmett replied dryly. "Get some rest. Tomorrow you become a married man and a significant landowner." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Both come with responsibilities I expect you to take seriously." As Jesse climbed the stairs to his room, he reflected on how much had changed in the span of a week. He had entered into this arrangement as his father's dutiful son, prepared to endure a marriage of convenience for the sake of expanding Hawkins' holdings. Now, on the eve of his wedding, he found himself standing against his father's potential. Allies defending land that wasn't yet legally his for the sake of a woman he had only just begun to truly know. And somehow, none of it felt like an obligation anymore. It felt like a choice, like purpose, like the beginning of something authentic in a life that had been defined by others for too long. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. Wedding day dawned with the crisp clarity that only October in Montana Territory could deliver. The sky stretched, endless blue above Mill Creek's white-steepled church, where a small but curious crowd had already begun to gather. The marriage of Emmett Hawkins' son to Owen Lakota's scarred daughter was the most interesting event the small community had witnessed in years. Inside the church's small antechamber, Jesse adjusted his string tie for the third time, his normally steady hands betraying unusual nervousness. He wore a new black suit, ordered from Denver months earlier for business purposes and now pressed into service for an entirely different kind of contract. A soft knock at the door preceded May's entrance. She carried a small box and wore a dress of deep burgundy, finer than her usual practical attire. "You'll wear that tie threadbare if you keep fussing with it," she observed with gentle amusement. Jesse dropped his hands with a self-conscious smile. "Never thought I'd be anxious about a business arrangement." May's dark eyes softened. "Is that still how you see it?" The question hung in the air, simple yet profound. Jesse considered it honestly, thinking of the past 2 weeks, of Kiona's intelligence and strength, of fighting fire beside her, of planning their future across her kitchen table. "No," he admitted quietly, "not anymore." May nodded as if confirming something she'd already known. "I brought you something." She opened the small box to reveal a pair of silver cufflinks, intricately patterned with a design Jesse recognized from May's own Blackfoot heritage. "These were my father's," she explained. "He wore them the day he married my mother, a Blackfoot woman and a white settler who found something worth building together." She placed them in Jesse's palm. Seemed fitting. Jesse closed his fingers. Around the small treasures, deeply moved. "May, I can't take these." "You can and you will," she interrupted firmly. "They belong with someone who understands what they represent." As he fastened the cufflinks, Jesse thought about what they symbolized. The joining of different worlds, the courage to forge a new path between traditions, the possibility of bridging divides that others considered unbridgeable. "Thank you," he said simply. May straightened his lapels with maternal care. "Your mother would be proud today," she said quietly. "Not of the land or the deal, of you." Before Jesse could respond to this unexpected sentiment, another knock sounded, harder, more peremptory. The door opened to reveal Emmett, resplendent in his finest suit, his expression unreadable. "It's time," he announced. "The Lakotas have arrived." May squeezed Jesse's arm once before slipping out, leaving father and son alone in a moment that suddenly felt weighted with decades of unspoken words. "Well," Emmett said, surveying his son with critical eyes, "you look the part." "Is that all that matters?" Jesse asked. "Looking the part?" Emmett's brow furrowed slightly. "It matters that you remember who you are, a Hawkins, whatever. Sentiments you may have developed for the Lakota girl. Don't forget what this union is truly about." "And what is it truly about, father?" Jesse challenged quietly. "Legacy," Emmett replied without hesitation. "Expansion, security." Jesse nodded slowly. "Those things matter, yes, but they're hollow without something more." "Save the poetry for your vows," Emmett dismissed, checking his pocket watch. "The minister is waiting." As they walked toward the church sanctuary, Jesse felt a strange calm settling over him. The nervous energy that had plagued him all morning transformed into quiet certainty. Whatever his father's motivations, whatever circumstances had brought them to this day, what happened next would be his choice. The small church was surprisingly full. The front pews held the territorial judge, the banker Mr. Carson, and other business associates of Emmett's. Behind them sat neighboring ranchers and townspeople, their expressions ranging from curiosity to genuine goodwill. Along the east wall stood Joseph Whitefeather and his family, dignified in their finest clothes, honoring the invitation Kiona had extended. Jesse took his place before the altar, where the minister waited with an expression of professional solemnity. As the small organ began to play, the congregation rose and turned toward the doors. Owen Lakota entered first, tall and proud despite the years of hardship etched in his face. Behind him came Kiona. Jesse's breath caught at the sight of her. She wore not white, but a dress of deep turquoise blue that echoed the Montana sky. Her dark hair was partly braided with silver threads, partly flowing loose down her back. She carried no flowers, but walked with straight-back dignity, her gaze steady. As father and daughter approached the altar, Jesse noticed that Kiona wore no veil. Her scars were visible to all, not hidden as many had expected. The whispers that rustled through the congregation confirmed that this choice had surprised them as much as it moved him. Owen placed his daughter's hand in Jesse's with quiet dignity. Their eyes met briefly, man to man, father to future son, before Owen stepped aside. Now Kiona stood beside Jesse, her hand warm in his, her dark eyes clear and direct. In them he saw neither fear nor resignation, but a calm courage that humbled him. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying through the hushed church, "we are gathered here today." The ceremony proceeded with traditional words, promises of honor, loyalty, faithfulness, spoken by two people who had begun as strangers thrust together by circumstance and now stood as allies by choice. When the time came for the rings, Jesse slipped a simple gold band onto Kiona's finger, not an ornate Eastern showpiece as Emmett might have preferred, but something practical and lasting, like the woman who would wear it. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." This moment, their first true intimacy, would be witnessed by the entire community. Jesse was acutely aware of his father's calculating gaze, of the curious stares fixed on Kiona's scarred cheek, of the expectations and judgments that surrounded them. He leaned forward slowly, giving Kiona time to prepare, to turn her unmarked, sighed toward him if she wished, but she faced him squarely, holding his gaze with quiet dignity. Their lips met in a kiss that began as a formality but softened into something genuine, brief, but tinged with promise. When they parted, Jesse saw surprise and something warmer flicker in Kiona's eyes before her composed expression returned. "Mrs. Hawkins," he murmured, "just for her." "Mr. Lakota," she returned with the ghost of a smile. Together, they turned to face the congregation as the minister presented them as man and wife. The applause that followed was polite rather than enthusiastic, but Jesse noticed several genuine smiles among the neighboring ranchers, people who recognized that this union might strengthen the entire community against outside threats. The traditional wedding dinner was held at Hawkins Ranch. The long dining table extended to accommodate important guests. Emmett presided at one end, all genial host and successful patriarch, while Owen sat at the opposite end, dignified despite his discomfort in such formal surroundings. Jesse and Kiona occupied the middle, fielding congratulations and navigating the subtle currents of power and politics that flowed around them. Through it all, Jesse remained acutely aware of Kiona beside him, her straight posture, her measured responses, her unflinching gaze when addressed directly. She was, he realized with growing admiration, a natural diplomat. Where he had expected Discomfort or resentment in this gathering of people who had long gossiped about her, she showed neither. Instead, she engaged with each guest appropriately, revealing a social intelligence that matched her practical knowledge. As the meal concluded, Emmett rose to offer a toast. The room quieted immediately, all eyes turning to the cattle baron, whose wealth and influence dominated the region. "To new beginnings," Emmett declared, raising his glass, "and to the expansion of the Hawkins legacy through this advantageous union." His gaze swept the table. The combined Hawkins properties now represent the largest private holding in the territory, a force to be reckoned with in uncertain times. The emphasis on property rather than the marriage itself was unmistakable. Jesse felt Kiona tense almost, imperceptibly beside him. "Mr. Lakota," Emmett continued, addressing Owen with practiced cordiality, "your contribution to this partnership ensures your family's place in the territory's future development." Contribution, as if Owen had simply transferred livestock rather than entrusted his only daughter to the Hawkins name. Jesse saw the flicker of dignified pain in the older man's eyes, though Owen nodded with outward composure. Before Emmett could continue, Jesse stood, taking up his own glass. The unexpected movement drew all eyes to him. "I'd like to add something," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "This wasn't planned, wasn't discussed, but suddenly felt essential. Today isn't just about land or cattle or water rights," he began, looking around the table at the assembled guests, "though those matter, of course." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "It's about recognizing that true strength comes not just from accumulation, but from combination." He turned slightly toward Kiona, meeting her questioning gaze directly. "The Lakota family brings to this union not just property, but wisdom, knowledge of the land that goes beyond ownership to true stewardship." His voice strengthened. "Knowledge that Nakota Creek Ranch has maintained through drought and hardship because of Kiona's intelligence and determination." Surprise flickered across several faces at the table. Surprise that Jesse would publicly acknowledge his new wife's contributions rather than simply her father's assets. "In combining our families," Jesse continued, "we aren't simply expanding Hawkins Holdings. We're creating something new. A partnership that honors the best of both traditions." He raised his glass higher. "To my wife, Kiona Hawkins Lakota, whose strength and wisdom will shape our future as surely as any deed or contract." A moment of startled silence followed before glasses rose throughout the room. "To Kiona," several voices echoed, some with genuine warmth, others with curiosity about this unexpected turn. Jesse sat down, aware of his father's calculating gaze from the head of the table. But more important was Kiona's expression beside him, surprise giving way to something deeper, more meaningful. Beneath the table, her hand found his and squeezed briefly, a gesture that conveyed more than words could have. The meal concluded with discussions of cattle prices and territorial politics, but a subtle shift had occurred. Jesse had publicly declared his respect for his new wife, establishing that this would not be a marriage where Kiona disappeared into the Hawkins name. As guests began to depart, Emmett cornered Jesse near the study door, his voice low but sharp. "Interesting performance. Completely unnecessary and potentially undermining our position." "It wasn't a performance," Jesse replied quietly, "and our position is stronger, with Kiona recognized as a partner, not a possession." Emmett's eyes narrowed. "You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment." "No," Jesse countered. "I'm expanding my judgment to include factors you've always dismissed." He met his father's gaze directly. "The world is changing, Father. Those who adapt survive." Before Emmett could respond, Owen approached, nodding politely to both men. "Jesse, the hands are ready when you are. For the cattle move," he clarified, seeing Emmett's confusion. "Cattle move?" Emmett questioned sharply. "What cattle move?" Jesse straightened, facing his father squarely. The Lakota breeding stock. We're relocating them to the high meadow on our western boundary today. Today? Emmett's voice rose slightly. On your wedding day? That wasn't discussed or approved. The merger agreement gives me operational authority over the combined properties, Jesse reminded him calmly. This is an operational decision to protect valuable assets. Father and son locked gazes in silent confrontation, the underlying message clear. Jesse was no longer merely following orders or seeking permission. He was acting as an equal partner in the family business, making decisions based on his own judgment. After a tense moment, Emmett gave a tight nod. Very well, but I expect a full accounting of costs and benefits. You'll have it, Jesse agreed, along with my complete rationale. As Emmett walked away, Owen regarded Jesse with new respect. That wasn't easy. No, Jesse acknowledged. But necessary. He looked across the room to where Kiona stood speaking with May, the two women engaged in what appeared to be serious conversation. As if sensing his gaze, Kiona looked up, meeting his eyes across the crowded parlor. No words passed between them, yet understanding flowed. She gave a small nod before excusing herself from May and making her way toward him. The men are ready, she said simply when she reached them. I've changed into riding clothes, will you? The question carried more significance than its practical surface. It was an invitation to step fully into their partnership, beginning with the work that needed doing. Yes, Jesse replied. I'll be right with you. An hour later, they rode side by side at the head of a small procession, ranch hands from both properties moving the precious Lakota breeding stock toward their new winter grazing grounds. Behind them, the sun cast their shadows long across the land that now united rather than divided their families. Not the traditional wedding day, Jesse observed, glancing at Kiona in her practical riding clothes, her hair now braided simply for the work ahead. No, she agreed, a hint of amusement in her voice, but perhaps more fitting for us. Us, he repeated, liking the sound of it. We've come a long way from that first day at your garden. Kiona's expression softened in the late afternoon light. You've come a long way, she corrected gently, from looking at me as an obligation to seeing me as a partner, Jesse finished. A strength, not a burden. She nodded, emotion briefly showing in her dark eyes before her practical nature reasserted itself. We have work to do. We do, he agreed, not just today, but in all the days to come. He reached across the space between their horses, offering his hand. Together. Kiona looked at his outstretched hand, then at the man offering it. A man transformed from reluctant heir to determined partner in the span of 2 short weeks. She placed her hand in his, their fingers interlacing with natural ease. Together, she echoed, the word carrying the weight of a vow more meaningful than those they had exchanged in the church. As they continued riding westward, the combined lands of Hawkins and Lakota spreading around them like a promise, Jesse recognized that what had begun as his father's business arrangement had become something neither Emmett nor Owen could have anticipated. Not just a marriage of convenience or a merger of properties, but the foundation of a new legacy, one built on partnership, respect, and the courage to see beyond surface scars to the true worth beneath. Up next, you got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.